First, thank you, Simone Leigh, Rashida, Bombray, for organizing this phenomenal, deeply inspiring event, and for bringing all of these brilliant minds together, for your amazing work, both together and as individuals, and for your camaraderie. Thank you, Nonsi Kalel Mutiti, for the beautiful design of Loophole. You are felt everywhere here. Thank you to everyone else who has organized this event and enabled these days of gathering together. I am truly honored, humbled, and quite a bit overwhelmed to be standing here before you today. Thank you for sharing your space and time with me. The Mekong River rises within the Tibetan Plateau and courses through China and most of Southeast Asia. At this particular bank of the river, on the side of Thailand and looking across at Laos, the river appears impossibly wide and has a deceptively placid, smooth, milky brown surface which only betrays its profound force and undercurrent through the thin traces of rivulets and spirals that web its surface, and the speed with which it pushes our boat back downstream. I am standing at this bank and on this boat with a handful of family members who have gathered together to scatter the remaining ashes of my father to complete a ritual that had begun 2 years prior, immediately after his death, but which had been incomplete and delayed until a month ago because of lockdowns and distance. I want to open my talk with the story of a ritual of grief and of communion for a multitude of reasons. It was quite recent. The process of commemorating and remember my father's death, his life, and its hauntings is still fresh, but also so is the release from its grip. And also because the vast majority of my family is a dispersed network of exiles and immigrants, and so moments of gathering, no matter how small, feel deeply significant. And that both of these realities of gatherings and of paternal, patriarchal hauntings and the ways we work to undo them are important to my curatorial practice, which is what I will be speaking to today. I have gathered some excerpts from past, current, and future works, predominantly via anecdotes and stories, of moments, acts, and practices, or as Denise Ferreira da Silva more profoundly names them, feats, deeds, burdens, and artifacts, but more on that later, which articulate a synthesis of the conceptual concerns and the intellectual creative interlocutors and inspirations that have driven or inspired some of my work, most of which have been framed by the work of gathering people together, and of the importance of insisting that this work is valorized and historicized. To think of exhibition making as a tool for gathering shared sensibilities and enunciative gestures of people who share practices or cosmologies of being and imagining the world, and as both activity of love and intervention. A first example, an act of love and insistent intervention. On November 17, 1963, the writer Paulette Nardal wrote a letter to a scholar of the Negritude movement in which she clarified the following, quote, L.S. Senghor and Aimé Césaire re-articulated the ideas that we launched and expressed them with more flash and brio. We were but women, true pioneers. Let us say that we blazed the trail for them, end quote. While described as bitter by its recipient, Paulette's letter firmly confronts the masculinist genealogy that had become the rote history of the Negritude movement, a cultural movement that she and her sisters, André and Jane Nardal, and countless other women, scholars, had not only contributed to, but also initiated in both intellectual and practical terms. In the 1920s, Paulette and her sisters had been the first Black students at the Sorbonne when they wrote and published extensively on Black consciousness, co-founded and edited journals that were central to the proliferation of Negritude ideas, and hosted a literary salon in their home, bringing together intellectuals of the Anglophone and Francophone Black diaspora to discuss these ideas. Now, in this letter written later in life, Paulette argued passionately for the importance of her sister Jane's texts on Pan-African racial consciousness, stating that they presaged their male counterparts' essays, which had been canonized as foundational. The Nardal sisters were not the only scholars of Negritude obscured by the long shadows cast by limited historical narrative. Suzanne Russi-Césaire was a writer, theorist, and philosopher whose texts synthesized the tangible and intangible concerns of plenitude and surrealism in order to construct identities and historical narratives that allowed a radical pluralism, encompassing vast geographies and wide temporal scales while accommodating the inherent instability and incoherence of the construction of both identity and history. Her writing acknowledged itself as an ongoing process of connection, one which would reveal itself at times and at others remain obscured, both by choice or circumstance. This brief account of Paulette's epistolary missive and of Suzanne's work is an excerpt from the introduction for a small, limited edition curatorial publication that I produced in 2018 for the 10th Berlin Biennale for Contemporary Art. Strange Attractors followed the principle espoused by the late curator B.C. Silva that books serve as exhibition platforms as well, and took the premise of a mathematical term within chaos theory of the fractal pattern that a chaotic system follows, such as the rivulets in the water of the Mekong River. The book was an exercise in uncertainty and a search for analog strategies of opacity. It borrowed from Edward Glissant's statement in his indispensable essay for opacity, which continues the discourse Suzanne established in the 1940s of the radical plurality of subjectivities, that, quote, human behaviors are fractal in nature, end quote. The letter's games and art projects within Strange Attractors engage with notions of glitch, cosmology, relationality, and scale. They reflected how our unstable personal cosmologies and ever-evolving epistemologies are the result of the tenuous ties that bind our relations. Paulette Nardal's letter confronted the inherently incomplete nature of canonical historical narratives and simultaneously insisted upon being included within it. At the same time, the historical exclusion and contemporary inclusion of the sisters and their salons as integral founders of Negritude instigates an interesting shift in the rote hierarchization of formal and informal exchange, of those deemed as facilitators, mediators, or those who are contributors to history. Paulette's letter is as much about honoring the important work of gathering, but also the strength of sisterly love. The important work accomplished through the camaraderie of women and femmes is, of course, what has made the work of Audre Lorde return so centrally in these past few years of my work, and in many ways invoked through the work of Alexis Pauline Gumbs. Lorde's writings, of course, but really her commitment to connecting to and building global networks of feminist camaraderie and solidarity are key. This can be best seen in the writings that she engaged with fellow poet and friend, Pat Parker, particularly one written October 12, 1974, which outlined and insisted to Pat how and who to contact to get some poems published and paid for. Another breathtakingly beautiful trace of one of the women Audre loved and who loved her can be found in the Spelman College archives that house Audre Lorde's papers. Mildred Thompson, an American abstract painter and sculptor, gave to Audre a diminutive notebook of intricately detailed black ink drawings, which she titled A Female Landscape, reproduced in full in Strange Attractors. Dated 1977, the same year as when Audre was diagnosed with breast cancer, the notebook features abstracted cosmic swirls and female forms converging to reveal endless landscapes, mountains of breasts as hilltops, 6 pairs of eyes serves as stars above, a promise of cosmic connection as a vulva unfolds in the swirling lines of a night sky. Audre wrote in the service of Black and queer women, striving to find language to empower them, to make connections, and to connect with them. It was for this reason that when she learned that her cancer had returned and had to struggle not only with the disease but also with the dehumanizing medical conflicts in pursuit of treatment in the last 2 decades of her life, she published a series of journal entries or prose monologues in order to share her experience, to heighten awareness of issues related to women's health, and to ask us, quote, how do we learn to love each other while we are embattled on so many fronts, written on June 21st, 1984 in Berlin. This question has provided the core of an ongoing project in collaboration with my friend and collaborator, the curator Thiago de Paula Souza, whom I met while we were co-curating the 10th Berlin Biennial for Contemporary Art in 2018, We Don't Need Another Hero, together with Gabi Ntobo, Yvette Mutumba, and Moses Serabiri, and which included the work of the brilliant Grada Quilomba. How do we learn to love each other while we are embattled on so many fronts raises questions of how does one teach or share? How does one survive? How does one fight? How does one repair? How does one nourish? In the summer of 2021, we organized an 8-week-long series of online workshops around the same questions upon the invitation of artists Sam Sami and Yasaman Orang at Tangstation, an artist-run project space in the Netherlands. These workshops were held online and for a group of invited international participants. The workshops unfolded through an open and speculative approach in which we shared projects we found appropriately responsive to the generative query of how, and while also creating a reading list, glossary, and implementing an initial model for an ethically redistributed budget. Our current collaborative work continues around this question, both as a 2-year nomadic curatorial program at Vleeshel Center in the Netherlands, but most recently at a newly opened group exhibition, Parasite, in Hong Kong, titled While We Are Embattled. While We Are Embattled is a group exhibition that emerged from this question and is now focused on its conjunctive clause. In so doing, it adopts the multifold meanings held within a conjunction as a grammatical term for a part of speech that serves as a connector, as an instance of simultaneous occurrence, and finally, as it relates to the movements of interstellar cosmic bodies and their interrelated relationships. This exhibition evolves from the question posed and actions adopted by Black women artists and feminists, including but not solely Lorde, but in large part to the theoretical frameworks provided through the first Loophole of Retreat gathering at the Guggenheim. The artist and academic Denise Ferreira da Silva describes the work of Black feminists and artists as doings, and these doings as feats, burdens, and artifacts which are enacted in the face of, despite and beyond certain persistent states of embattlement. During the first iteration of Loophole of Retreat, the Guggenheim, she spoke and wrote in influx. Because how refers to what has and has not already been done, to what takes place at this exact moment and in that other unimagined place, because how recalls infinity. All I do here is share with you another possible how, another Black feminist doing inspired by the kind of sensibility announced when one attends to doings that are always and simultaneously feats, deeds, burdens, artifacts, end quote. In describing artistic work as the actions and matter which result from unbounded sensibility produced through certain societal conditions, and by focusing on the process, the how of the work, rather than on its formal structures, Ferreira da Silva offers an aesthetic understanding predicated on an unbounded sensibility, which allows for a fractal image of the world. This was a guiding principle in our process of curation for this exhibition, to engender not a method but a practice of curation, to attend to works and practices that process and address states of embattlement in ways that enact and or enable this unbounded sensibility, to offer possibilities of fractal worlds full of complexities, contradictions, and implications which offer possibilities for future engagement. The terms of engagement of the works within While We Are Embattled have not been defined by individual subjectivities, but through shared sensibilities, or as we would like to think of, through a politics of affection. To borrow the words of Suzanne Césaire again, this exhibition strives to present the shared dramas we collectively experience. Quote, "It is now vital to dare to know oneself, to dare to confess to oneself what one is, to dare to ask oneself what one wants to be. Here also people are born, live, and die. Here also the entire drama is played out." End quote. I think this was quoted yesterday as well. 2 examples. Exploring the generative potential of collective fabulation of myths and folktales, Noor Abed's film, Our Songs Are Ready for All the Wars to Come, brings together footage of Palestinian women performing both everyday rituals and particular rites of death and mourning. Filmed in an ancient Roman archaeological site located in the village of Al-Jib, northwest of Jerusalem, the rituals performed by the women intimately connect to the land. The women, played by the artist's mother and other family members, converge around an empty water well. Their actions are brought together by the chanting of Palestinian singer and composer Maya Kaldi. In filming these choreographed rites and rituals on Super 8 film, which harkens to an archival aesthetic, Abed creates her own mythology of common space, which exists beyond the dominant discourses that so often limit possibilities of subjectivity and political articulations. This film poses the question how myth and folklore and other forms of collective fabulation can provide a common methodology, How can myth and folklore provide a common methodology for narrative autonomy and also serve as our tools for reclamation and recovery? Mohsin Alahiari's research-based project series entitled She Who Sees the Unknown focuses on ancient Persian, Arabic, and Islamic mythology of queer feminine force of the jinn, a powerful supernatural spirit figure invisible to humans but which hold great influence upon the workings of the world. Using digital technologies such as 3D simulation and digital fabrication, Alahiari's research and artwork refigures these ancient, monstrous figures and their associated myths in order to interrogate the lived and historical realities of colonialism, patriarchy, and ecological crisis, and to queer their associated normative narratives. The multimedia installation, Aisha Kandisha, presents the multifaceted non-binary jinn who is associated with bodies of water such as rivers and who is said to have the power to possess and transform men through direct confrontation. It offers the possibility for self-reflection through trance and asks how shared narratives of anger and mourning can become common tools of enunciation and collective transformation. On a recent visit to my grandmother's farm, in a small village in an increasingly right-wing and radical Poland, I offered her a handful of rocks I'd gathered during an afternoon stroll. Marveling that I still practiced this childhood pastime, she led me to her china cabinet and showed me a rock I had found, loved, and gifted to her as a child. This small rock, long forgotten for nearly 2 decades by its gatherer, had sat nestled between family photos and crystal vases, as had a small urn of my father's ashes ensconced in a family shrine, patiently waiting for the moment when they could once again serve to remind us of the depth and antinomies of our love. I would like to end with a short quotation from a poem by James Baldwin, which serves as the beginning of a postponed project that I'm working on, which takes its departure point from an interstellar body that is both ambivalently categorized, is in a constant state of formation, and holds complicated but generative relationships with their cosmic fellows. Describing the work of birds in a poem titled Munich, Winter 1973, for YS, Baldwin writes, "They are aware that on long journeys, each bears the other, whirring, stirring, love occurring in the middle of the terrifying air." Thank you.